I'm Anaïs Roche. I'm the International Development Manager of Aware. I'm excited to welcome tonight Maura Reilly and Tal Dekel for a special webinar on contemporary feminist art in Israel from an intersectional perspective. Before I give you the floor, Maura, because you will be the moderator for this webinar, let me say a few words about Aware. So Aware, Archives of Women Artists, Research and Exhibitions, is a French nonprofit co-founded in 2014 by Camille Morino. Our goal is to produce and distribute information on women artists of the 20th century, especially through our website, which welcomes more than 35,000 visitors a month. We collaborate more also with major museums, universities, research centers in France and abroad. And our action also relies on public fundings and donations. And of course, you are all welcome if you want to be part of our donors. So Maura, you're a curator and an arts writer. You've organized dozens of exhibitions internationally with a specific focus on marginalized artists. You have also written extensively on global contemporary art and curatorial practice. Let me mention the most recent book you've written, Curatorial Activism Towards an Ethics of Curating, which was named a Top 10 Art Book of 2018 by the New York Times. And you are also working on a new book project, The Ethical Museum, to be published in 2022. And I'm already really excited about this new book. So Maura, you are also you are here because you are our head of program, our new program team. And I think you want to say a few words about this program before you introduce Tal and this webinar. So thank you.
Great, thank you. So I want to speak a little bit about team, and I was hoping, Anaïs, that you would be introducing Tal. Is that okay?
If you want me to introduce Tal?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, so maybe you talk about team and then I introduce Tal.
Of course, thank you. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about team. This project came about a year and a few months ago when Anaïs and Camille Morino and I were in New York, and we were having a wonderful conversation about Aware. And we came up with this idea of making it, trying to push the kind of international content. It was already moving in that direction, but to really find a way to globalize the content. And that's how TEAM came about. It stands for Teaching, E-Learning Agency, Mentoring. And it's an international academic network. It's dedicated to the production and sharing of knowledge about women artists around the world. And the objective of TEAM is to, enrich and expand the Aware website. And the priority is really being given to geographic areas that are really still underrepresented to date. And the other aim is to support the training of a new generation of art historians who are sensitive to gender issues and understand the importance of women artists. So the team is also a network of solidarity and transnational reflection on the issues by these art historians. To date, the network is made up of 14 members, academics and professors, and 65 master's and doctoral students whose research covers 5 continents. And Tal Dekel is one of the professors who's working with us on TEAM. And she's brought to us 5 amazing students who are writing biographical entries for the Aware website. So we're really, really thrilled to have Tal aboard. And I'll turn it back to Anaïs.
Thank you, Maura. So Tal, in a few words, so you live and work in Israel. You are head of the Visual Literacy Studies program and head of the curatorial program at the Kibbutzim College in Tel Aviv. You also teach in the art history program department at Tel Aviv University. You are also chair of the Association of Women's Art and Gender Research in Israel. And you used to be chair of the Gender Studies Forum at Tel Aviv University. Tal, you specialize in feminism and arts in Israel, and your research focus on gender, migration, and transnationalism, as well as on women and old age in the Israeli context. So these are all the topics you will tell us about during the webinar. You've published many books and articles. I will just mention a few of them. One is Gendered Art and Feminist Theory in 2013. Another one, Transnational Identities, Women, Arts, and Migration in Israel in 2016. And the most recent one is Women and Ageism, Gender Aspects in Israeli Art, 2020.
Yes.
So, Maura, do you want to launch the discussion?
Yeah, well, I know that Tal will be sharing with us a presentation of slides, which I'm really looking forward to, as I'm sure everyone else is. And we will follow that presentation with a series of questions, and we'll open it up to the audience for that occasion. So I'll turn it over to Tal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Let me start right away with sharing my PowerPoint presentation. So can everybody see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Great. So let me start by thanking you, Anais and Mara, for this generous introduction. So my talk aims to explore the development of feminist art in Israel with the emphasis on the contemporary scene, what is happening today in Israel. Generally speaking, feminist art criticism and art histories in the last, 2-3 decades have moved to include an ever-growing number of geographies and cultures in their discourse. This is evident, for example, in the large number of exhibitions and scholarly texts about feminist art in the Middle East, although not so much in Israel or about Israel quite yet. This is why I'm so very thankful for the opportunity to talk about this topic. And I would like to thank all the AWARE team, Anais, of course, and everybody else involved in organizing this webinar. And of course, to Mara, who is moderating this event. Thank you so much. Some scholars of feminist art history, which are doing what Maskinan calls imperial or normative art history, tend to present a linear global narrative, one that leaves out places that do not fit into the temporal trajectory or do not offer some kind of an idea of progress. In parentheses, interestingly, it usually applies to places outside the Euro-American map. Indeed, Israeli feminist art does not neatly correspond to the transcript of a linear, consistent narrative. That perhaps could be one reason why feminist art in Israel has been less addressed by the imperial feminist art history, with some exceptions, including references to Israeli artists such as Sigalit Landau. You might have heard of her. But of course, not all feminist art historians go about that way. And this wonderful webinar is a living proof of that. So thank you again for this. In this talk, I will try to investigate diverse manifestations of feminist art in Israel by using the analytical tool of intersectionality. By so doing, I aim to encourage new reading strategies that displace both the canon of imperial feminist art history and vernacular art histories. After having said that, I will also say this. My talk today will somewhat start with giving into or following a linear logic narrative or imperial feminist art history, but very quickly, I will part with that path and suggest different perspectives. So in the first section of the talk, I will briefly elaborate on the beginnings, so to speak, of feminisms and feminist art history in Israel. In the second part of the talk, I will demonstrate how the crucial turning point in local gender and feminist criticism in art history and its historiography took place, offering new discourses. Then I will go on to discuss some examples of contemporary art. And towards the end of the talk, I will offer some, hopefully, new insights in regard to art and feminisms in the region and in relation to global art history at large. And that will come up to, I hope, about 40 minutes. And finally, at the very end of the talk, I will very much like to share with you my current research that I have been immersed in for the last 4 or 5 years, ageism, old age, and feminist art in the Israeli context. So that will come up to a little bit less than 1 hour. Okay, so until about 2.5 decades ago, the term Israeli art feminist history had an unfamiliar ring, if at all seemed applicable to the work of only some number of local women artists, very few. Today, some agree that feminist art in Israel indeed exists. Some say that there are feminist artists, but there is no real feminist art movement or no distinct group that could be called that. In order to understand the connections between art and feminisms in Israel, I will briefly explain about feminisms and as it emerged in both the social political reality in Israel and, of course, in the arts. In pre-statehood Israel during the 19th and early 20th century, Zionism promoted, well, Zionism is the awakening national revival movement of the Jews from Europe striving to settle in Palestine, their ancient homeland mentioned in the Bible, right? So Zionism in pre-statehood stage promoted the idea of gender equality in the spirit of European and North American first wave feminism. Sounds great, right? But however, in Palestine or pre-state Israel, as elsewhere in the world, the right to vote, in Israel it was given to women in 1926, yielded a false impression of an egalitarian society, while in fact, century-old patterns of masculine dominance still were maintained. Today, there is a consensus in Israeli feminist research that there was no actual first wave feminism in the country. Neither was there a second wave feminism, radical Marxist, ecofeminist, or other during the 70s, right? So, or 80s. One reason perhaps is that the pioneering entities of the kibbutz, kibbutz is a collective community, right? An organization which is a combination of socialism and Zionism, typical of the early settlements of Jews in the modern Israel. So the kibbutzes proclaimed equality between the sexes, although it was de facto a false statement. Of course, women were mostly marginalized into feminine roles and jobs within the kibbutzim. Another reason is that Israel is a hyper-militarist society. The dominant role of the army to which women are conscripted, all women have to go to the army for 2 years. I was a soldier for 2 years. The fact that also women go to the army created the mistaken impression that women in Israel are emancipated and therefore are in no need for any foreign idea or strange ideology such as feminism to be introduced into the country. And of course, again, there is no real equality between the genders in our army, not at all. Another likely reason for the lack of enthusiasm for first and especially second wave feminism in Israel is that the new state of Israel, established not so long ago, only in 1948, was in an almost constant state of war, struggling for its sovereignty, its economic well-being, and its crucial cultural definition. This may well have caused both men and women to feel unable to deal with yet another additional ideology like feminism, which was perceived as a low priority issue in view of the overwhelming task of nation building. So if any female artists, say till mid-20th century, survived the oppressive forces and marginalization of just being, living, working in a patriarchal society and got to work as artists, they were very privileged women and well connected to the mainstream and its key figures, all men, of course, back then. The subject matter of women artists that survived the evading were related, not surprisingly, to nation building and subscribed to the Zionist ethos in works such as Monuments, for example, we see here the sculptor Batya Lishansky, who created representations of men and brave pioneers and women as mothers of the nations or nurturers of the soldier, etc., etc. Women artists who did not comply and align with the Zionist narratives were forgotten. So even in the late 1960s, as second wave feminism washed many countries, Israel was relatively untouched by it. For instance, during the 1970s, we had the War of Yom Kippur in 1973, yet another war, I should say, one of many. And this war, more than others, powerfully contributed to social change because we lost the war. Up to that point, Israel always won its wars, so that was like a crisis. Right? So, and secondly, the growing pressure from the mechanisms of controlling the occupied territories, ruling over another people, the Palestinians, right, became so very difficult by then. That war gave rise to a variety of protest movements, including a not very significant or not very influential feminist art activism. As I said, local feminist activism did not develop into a full-fledged second wave feminism movement like in other places around the world. And if we look to the art field during these decades, say during the even 60s and 70s, women artists in Israel seem to still refuse to adopt feminist notions in their art, rejecting even the very definition, women's art. They insisted that they felt at no disadvantage because of their gender. Artist Aviva Uri, one of our most important, she's a well-established artist, influencing generations of artists, both men and women. She's like a founder of minimalism in Israeli art combined with local version of, I would say here we can see alta povera of some kind, if you will. She wrote, Aviva Uri, she wrote in her memoirs, and I want to quote, "If one wishes to create good art, one must firstly be an artist and only then consider maybe also being a woman," end of quote. But it was not for the lack of women critics, curators, or artists that feminist art failed to surface in Israel for so long. It was the climate of the art scene itself and the society at large that did not encourage women artists to create from a feminist perspective up until the early 1990s. So in the early 1990s, a paradigmatic shift occurred. I'm sorry, but I don't have much time, unfortunately, to explain in depth why this change happened finally in that point of time and not another different point earlier or later. But since then, Israeli art incorporated feminist components and maintains a dialectic relationship with feminist art created in other places around the globe, while nonetheless reflecting its own historical and local situatedness. So it can be said that it took Israeli women artists who, as I said, skipped, so to speak, first and second wave feminism. It took them less than a decade to make what I termed a quantum leap into the next theoretical and practical artistic stage and work in the spirit of contemporary feminist art we see all over the globe. Now, although the temptation, I prefer from this point on not to use any more terms such as waves and such kind of concepts such as progress or tardiness, because I find them to be a very logocentric way of thinking, which is a binary way that is narrowing the options of thinking about, or I would say conceptualizing the works that we are about to see. An Israeli artist that you might know, I mentioned her name a few seconds ago, Sigalit Landau. She was included in the Global Feminism show. So from the start of her career, one of Landau's main subjects was the female body, on which she produced many photographic images, also complex video installations and references to the absent female body through items such as dresses she immersed in the Dead Sea salty water. The Dead Sea is a very famous place, geologically and geopolitically important, right? So many women artists from the 1990s and on, after following postmodern concept that allowed in turn post-Zionism to flourish, feminism to flourish, etc. in the country, enabled new discourses to become bon ton and to conduct more complex intervention, and that take various power relations into account. An Israeli artist who related to the concept of the beauty myth is Ayelet Payento, expressing criticism of normative Western perceptions of the female body and its standardization. In the photograph we see here, Sausage, from 1997, she wrapped her naked body in sheets of plastic cling films, turning it into a grotesque object, much like a sausage ready to be sold in the market. In another series titled I Go to Sunflowers, she photographed herself naked, looking directly at the camera as her hand grabbed her belly, while accentuating her overweight body. No, it's not, or even if it is, why not? Payento said that this project was strongly influenced by feminist literature she has been exposed to lately as an art student, a couple of years before she created this image, right? So Payento and others deal with women's body as an object to the male gaze, but also with women's internal world, their experience, their sexuality. Autoerotic pleasure is at the center of Galia Yahav's video Blind Spots, in which the artist herself is seen. She was the very first Israeli woman artist to produce such a work in Israel in an overt, explicit way. That's 1999. The work draws on feminist theories about the gaze, issues of representation, agency, and also it refers to the relations between feminism and pornography, you know, the anti-pornography versus anti-pornography debates and so on that have been debated decades ago in other places. Artist Anat Betzel used the image of the bride in many of her works. Here, the installation from 1994. The installation was composed of machine-woven doormats hanging on the walls, and the floor was also covered with doormats. What we saw here and the one before is curated by Tammy Katz-Freeman. The installation is reminiscent of many bride images created in other parts of the world, but I remind you again that these kinds of work were created in Israel only since the 1990s, not the 70s. Maybe some who could bring into mind Woman House, of course, it comes into mind in the North American context, 1972, but also violence against women as gender-based crimes is addressed by feminist artists in Israel as elsewhere around the world. In Neta Harari's, this one is Vertigo Inbox, it deals with violence. We see the piece in which the woman's face is shown battered. And the second one is a woman lying face down on an asphalt road. It's as if she has fallen out of a driving vehicle, insinuating she was a victim of an attack. Breast cancer survivor who underwent a mastectomy, artist Ariela Shavid created a series of images reflecting the dramatic changes her body had undergone. Calendar comprises of a photograph. This is only, I brought one out of a series, depicting herself on the beach in a seductive, so to speak, pose in an imitation of an innumerable calendar images of women prevalent in, well, everywhere. Here she sought to challenge traditional conceptions regarding the female body. Does a woman without breasts lose her femininity? What should a woman's body look like in order to be read as such? Artists such as Shira Richter addresses motherhood, combining notion of radical feminism. This is her stomach after giving birth to her twin baby boys, and Marxist feminism. These are the pacifiers and feeding bottles that she is using for her twin babies. So these are just a few examples. From the works we discussed so far, we can see that contemporary feminist artists in Israel work on very similar subjects as feminist artists in other parts of the world, right? Well, that is because we are all still living in a patriarchal world. However, there are also local specificities that are at the center of the oeuvre of feminist artists that are working in Israel. And I would like to show you now some examples that testify to this, because as we know, knowledge and the production of knowledge is always situated and is context dependent and related to position and the particularities of life experiences of each woman. So I will now talk through the analytical perspective of intersectionality, right? The term intersectionality is the multiple identity related facets, race, class, gender, religion, etc., working together but differently on every particular woman, affecting her life and degree of agency. And that analytical tool helps explain the multidimensional oppressions of women from different social groups that are working within the field, and helps to expose the various power relations at work and against each other and in relation to different groups of women. So Yael Bartana's video profile represents an army practice conducted by female soldier on a firing range. The camera captures their routine actions performed in the military framework, showing issues of power and authority, stress and exhaustion that they undergo in the army as women. I remind you that all women in Israel have to go to the army for 2 years. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule, and it's changing. But the subject of integrating women into the combat units was seriously placed on the public agenda in Israel only in the mid-1990s. Before that, most women served in very dull, insignificant jobs such as secretaries, as I did. And feminist artists soon followed this public discussion and are now offering works such as Ofri Maron's piece. This is her daughter that is serving in a combat unit. And Anna Fromchenko. This work relates to this specific woman in the picture. She was the highest ranked woman ever in our army. Arbivai is her name. She was Major General, but when she finished her job, nobody replaced her. So it's like a very thick glass ceiling. As women pave their way into more and more combat jobs in the army, women are now serving in positions which were, up until recently, exclusively male realms. This step, achieved in one of the most masculine, chauvinist arenas of Israeli society, is regarded by many as highly significant. But despite these accomplishments, many feminists disapprove of women or men joining the army altogether, because the army, by definition, is not solely concerned with defense, but frequently employs violent, repressive, and destructive measures, not to mention the IDF role in the crucial presence and maintenance in the occupied territories. So it's very problematic indeed in the feminist sense. Like in the work by Avital Lifshitz, that shows in an explicit way the combined oppressive forces of chauvinism, the growing nationalism, and sexism and racism against the Arabs in the Israeli context. This map is of Israel, right, with the occupied territories. So many nowadays are expressing a pacifist feminist protest in their artworks, and I did not yet mention the even the ethnic aspects of Yael Bartana's work, which are folded into this work, all the power relations existing between different women soldiers from diverse ethnic background in that specific piece of Bartana. So, hopping on to tackling representations through identity politics, artist Shula Keshet creates representations of Mizrahi women, that is Jewish women from Arab countries' origin, a social group that suffers from a double form of oppression, gender and ethnicity, because the hegemonic group in the country is Jewish people from Euro-American origin called Ashkenazi. Her work titled Veiled, and I have yet another one from that series, is, well, there are self-portraits in which her face is covered with so-called a veil woven in a traditional way. Here, only those two I brought, but representing both the aesthetic world of Oriental art, which Western art and traditionally traditionally dismissed as crafts, and also the stereotype of perhaps Arab woman masked by a veil or a burqa and sorts. Keshet undermines this derogatory attitude by her straightforward, assertive gaze directed at the camera and the viewers, accentuating her pride in her Persian culture and her belief in her own sovereignty as a woman, as a subject. Anissa Ashkar, a Palestinian Muslim born in the city of Acre, employs a performative strategy in her works. Across her face, she writes sentences in Arabic language, serving as a living canvas, a site for political as much as an artistic declaration. The written words on her face are taken from sources like songs, prose, the Quran, and often also from her own thoughts. The caption Ashkar's work engages with the status of women in intra-community context, religion, tradition, and also deals with Jewish-Arab relations, economic gaps between them, national identity, etc. And the subjects she treats are linked to feminist activism within the Arab and Palestinian community, as much as to feminist activities of Jewish and Palestinian women fighting together against patriarchal oppression. Queer artists and queer contents are also evident in the art field in Israel. Here we see Paulina Logachev's work. She documents dress-ups events in which LGBTQ members of the community perform numbers, or often very political pieces, right? This is lip syncing, right? So here, a friend of mine, Sonia Soloviev, is getting ready to do her numbers. She does numbers as a drag king. And Sichi Gilad, a lesbian artist, photographs a variety of women of her community. Her work is closely linked to the lesbian feminist movement, which has developed in Israel, fighting for recognition and rights within various frameworks, both the LGBTQ movement at large and independently in exclusively lesbian organizations such as Aswat, the Palestinian lesbian organization, or Bat Kol, the Jewish Orthodox lesbian organization, etc. So this piece, Yom Kippur, features a couple leaning against the railing of a deserted main road in Tel Aviv city. The absence of traffic, cars, trucks, buses, reflects the fact that the photograph was taken in a very special time, the Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, symbolizing the cessation of natural flow of life and praying, asking for forgiveness for all the sins of the passing year, right? Yom Kippur. I have to explain that Israel, is an extremely pro-natal country because of national nationalist. It has to do with geopolitics and demographics, Jews versus Arabs, who will be the majority group in the area, right? And so the work functions as a critique of the stereotypical view of intimate relations between two women, as opposed to those between the heteronormative male-female couple, thinking of such women as an unnatural phenomenon and an obstruction of the normal flow of life, normal in the sense of the national sense of conduct of raising a family, having kids, then sending him off to be soldiers, and so on and so on. So, and of course we have identity politics under the category of religion. Here we see Nechama Golan's work, an ultra-Orthodox Jewish feminist woman. And of course, this applies to Orthodox Muslim, Cherkess, Druze, and more. But I want to please go on and think about yet another category. And think about migration and stratification points of women in Israel through transnational feminisms, and say that Israel has been an immigration country from its very beginning. I remind you, it was established in 1948, and this fact has always had a major influence in its very essence, but the 1990s have introduced a whole new level of challenges in both the effect of global scale and the ethno-national local context, which forced Israelis as a nation, and especially us as feminists, to think through frameworks of transnationalism. Zoya Cherkesky-Nandi from the former Soviet Union arrived in Israel as a young adult, and she still keeps close contacts with many feminist activists in Russia. She actually knows some Pussy Riot members. But I brought this to you today just to show that her art is very much about maintaining a transnational perspective, as she still is involved in what is happening in other nation states and what is happening in Russia more specifically. Sasha Korbatov and Alex Korbatov and Vanane Boryan, also from the former Soviet Union. They are artists that collaborate often, and here are a couple of their works, this and the next one. So these works deal again with feminist transnationalism, specifically focusing or expressing the ways in which structures of women's oppression move, or if you will, migrate across countries and continents and are perpetuated in the new place in which women arrive after migrating. So the subject here is, what are women's options for survival after the collapse of the communist bloc? Many were driven to become male brides in order to survive, especially in countries such as Moldova, the Ukraine, etc. Some coming to Israel for these reasons. Hence, but I want to show you another work those two artists did together. This is a huge installation in the most famous upscale boulevard in the city of Tel Aviv, Rothschild Boulevard. It's a vagina made out of many thousands of calling cards for using women in prostitution and exploiting them, women that are from the former Soviet Union. So it is a direct protest on that issue, but also it's complicated to explain in a very short or limited time, but I will try. It has to do with another painful issue. Israel is a very, very ethno-national country. In Israel, the question of Jewish identity in the context of the state differs from that same question posed in the context of the diaspora. In Israel, the question of who is a Jew is super, super crucial. It refers not merely or even primarily to one's religious identity, but broader issues of agency through issues of citizenship, nationality, belonging, ethnicity, and of course, gendered issues. Jews are, needless to say, the privileged group in the country, right? So Israel defines itself as a Jewish state. The ultra-Orthodox have the full mandate on personal status of the citizens, marriage and divorce. One cannot get married in the town hall or any kind of a civilian procedure, okay? They have the full mandate on that. So this issue bears directly on the status and everyday lives of immigrants from the former Soviet Union, a third of whom, over 1.5 million, who are not considered real or full kosher Jews according to those ultra-religious laws. So this predicament is a pivotal component of the identity of former Soviet Union immigrants and a recurrent theme in the work of many, many artists from that origin. Because a massive wave of immigrants from the former Soviet Union arrived in Israel since the 1990s, many have been subjected to a wide array of derogative stereotypes, and in particular the women among them. They are accused of coming to Israel for economic reasons only, not for Zionist reasons, and they are not real Jews, and that they are a threat to the purity of the Jewish people in the country. Some are afraid that they are diluting the blood, if you will, of real Jews by having babies to nice, unsuspecting, good Jewish young men, trapping them. Really very difficult and problematic rhetoric. But why are the women especially subjected to the derogatory attitude? Because Jewish identity is determined matrilineally. So Russian-speaking women are considered a biopolitical problem on a national scale. So this is the work. What is the work about? Okay, so I'm sorry, it's a little bit difficult. It's a very complex work. So the same, but in different manifestations, is what occurs with women immigrants from Ethiopia. The first major wave of incoming Jews from Ethiopia occurred in the 1980s, and then majorly another major one since 1991. But unfortunately, I don't think I have much time to go into an in-depth discussion about this right now. So I will come to conclude this part of my talk and say the art world in Israel differs from that in other parts of the world in terms of social, political context, economics, in many other aspects. The development of Israeli feminist art, both in theory and its artistic production field, though in some ways relates to the international scene, and things done elsewhere, should not be expected to precisely parallel it. Listening to the experiences of women artists in Israel reveals new questions that highlight the need for contemporary conceptualization of their multi-layered and relative status in the context of the nation state in the era of transnationalism. I believe that feminist transnationalism is a useful perspective through which to think critically about women in Israel because, as I explained, Israel is burdened by many social gaps, and they are always widening, gaps deriving from gender, religion, economic, ethnic, age, ability, and more differences. So transnational feminisms go beyond universalizing tendencies of Western feminism, producing an ethical model for feminist scholars and activists. That is why we must strive to flatten the hierarchies and not comply with the traditional art history praxis of comparison between artworks created in the centers or to those from other places around the globe. That is, oh, this Israeli or this Palestinian piece really looks like a Cindy Sherman. Oh, it looks like a Louis Bourgeois, right? We shouldn't do that. This tendency to understand who influenced whom or establish who is more advanced, less advanced, as noted of course, by Mara Riley and others, but is exactly what we need to refrain from and avoid from doing. So my work, I hope, reveals that there is no such thing as the Israeli artist, but rather many kinds of women. An approach of relational feminist analysis might facilitate the way to discuss their work collectively instead of an analysis such as a chronological or stylistic parameters. I choose to talk about the similarities as well as the differences between them as themes become context dependent. This approach leads to the discussion that could be organized thematically: sexuality, motherhood, ethnic or religion identity, etc., revealing the particularities of each artist according to her specific positionality. So transnational feminism is dismantling the notion that radicalism origins in the West. Disrupting the globalizing script of liberation and offering alternative genealogies and traditions of resistance is, in my opinion, a very good way to work through these issues. Looking at artworks as social documents provide women with the opportunity to articulate a self-referential model of representations and to negotiate a the self, and most importantly, to exercise agency. By offering radical criticism of women's life and political perspective on cultural situation, and by complicating the seemingly stable notions of self, nation state, and cultural belonging, I hope this presentation resonates the important word of bell hooks, who taught us perhaps one of the most important lessons: feminism is for everybody. So this is up to where I would like to please go to as far as talking about a survey, a quick survey of feminist art in Israel. And I would love to now, if I have a few more minutes remaining, to share with you a little bit more about what I have been working on lately. Old age, gendered representation of old age in the Israeli context. Mara, is that okay? I have a few more minutes. Thank you. So ageist incidents occur at almost every realm. Ageism and sexism are well entrenched in culture, and culture is what trains people to be ageist, especially against women. The beginning of major changes in the way, in the ways in which old women are represented in the arts, the growing number and the range of ways in which they are depicted, and the new alternative forms of such images is most evident since the second half of the 20th century, especially among feminist artists from around the world. In the early years of Israeli art, in terms of local canonic art history, it is usually counted from 1906, when the very first art academy, the Bezalel Academy in Jerusalem, was established. Till then, very few works of art included depictions of old women. Of those who did, two types can be differentiated. One portrayed indigenous old women seen through an Oriental gaze, and the other portrays privileged and well-known old women documented thanks to the high social standing that they held. But in the last 2 decades in Israel, an ever-growing number of representations of old women are created, and they are more sensitive to issues of diversity. In Israel, a young nation state, several social issues carry special significance for the elderly. 3 elements give distinctive shape and influence to the notions about old people and their actual lives. The centrality of the ethos of the sabre. Sabre is that of the young male pioneer person. So the second one is the Holocaust of Jews during the Second World War. And the third is the fact that Israel has a religion-based immigration policy and separatist citizenship that cater mainly for Jews. Each of these individually and all 3 combined create unique circumstances for old people in Israel, especially for the women, and influence their life in particular ways, and of course hold special gendered implication for women, for the old women. The work by Rachel Nemesh places the experience of the Holocaust on the continuum between being pushed to speak and being silenced about that terrible period in the lives of millions of Jews during the Second World War. At old age, when the time comes to sum up a life, a formative and often paralyzing experience like the Holocaust, we see that this is a subject that many artists are treating nowadays in Israel. In many arenas and subject in the country, because of the strong prevailing ethos of the brave Hebrew settler pioneer, the sabre, right? The survivors of the Holocaust are often pushed to shame, silenced about their experiences in the camps as survivors, right? It is especially difficult for women survivors because sometimes they get insinuations about them surviving thanks to sexual relations with guard, etc., while in the camps. So a lot of shame and silence is involved, and it is especially true for the women, the old women survivors. Nemesh's mother, you see the number on her arm? The number that has been burned onto her arm by the Nazis, yes? So the woman is sitting on in an introverted posture, covering her face with the palm of her hand. Palestinian artist Noel Jabour, a Christian from Nazareth, photographed Umiyad, a labor worker from Nablus, sitting on the ground in a field where she is working. The photo reflects the connection of Palestinian Arabs to their land, a connection that the generation of old women and men who experienced the Nakba personally feel in an especial, perhaps more intense way, against the background of national conflict within Israel between Palestinians and Israelis, the point of view of the elderly women is particularly interesting. In their book titled Twilight Nationalism, Politics of Existence at Life's End, Daniel Motaresco and Chaim Chazan claim that the old Palestinian is an agent of collective memory, a witness that can pass a report from firsthand. This image of the old Palestinian woman who experienced the Nakba and Naksa that shaped the national Palestinian consciousness at first hand is distinctive to her. It is umiyad. In the early 1990s, Aliza Averbuch began to photograph 80, 90, and even 100-year-olds who founded kibbutzim and moshavim. Through them, she encountered a unique generation of Jews who founded the State of Israel. When the men and women pioneers began to build Jewish settlements in Palestine in the 19th century, they were a uni-generational society of mainly young people. The kibbutz pioneers who were photographed by Averbuch described to her their amazement that they had become old. I quote, "We never thought we got old," said one woman to the artist while she was photographing her. So these very few examples, I have so many, I think are very specific, unique to the Israeli society, and they join some more general, if you will, global manifestation. One such case is the work of Chava Raucher. She created a series of paintings featuring partially clothed elderly women in seductive poses, which she hung on the exterior walls of a well-known, respected art gallery in Tel Aviv. But the Tel Aviv municipal art community censored the exhibition and pulled it down after receiving complaints from the residents of that street on the grounds that, I quote, "The exhibition is situated in a small street in a residential area and the works are inappropriate for the location," end of quote. While they think nothing of the abundance of advertisement posted on the exact same street, exploiting the body of young women, ads for, I don't know, swimsuits, underwear, etc., in more than often sexist and degrading manners, the exposure of bodies of old women is considered deeply disturbing, a complete taboo. The aging body is ostensibly personal and private, but it is political and public at the same time because of the social norms from which it deviates. In the best phenomenological tradition, as Simone de Beauvoir wrote in her book, The Second Sex, the body is not a thing, it is a situation. It is our grasp on the world and the outline of our projects. From the diversity of old age presented here, for instance, one can conclude that ageism is the polar opposite of aging. While ageism is characterized by absolute monolicity, old age is beaming with variety, diversity, individuality. Margaret Gillette formulated this well when stating, and I quote, "In nothing do people differ more than in their aging. In nothing are they more homogenized than by ageism," end of quote. In that respect, art holds an important role as feminist anti-ageist art can take active part in raising awareness and push forward positive public opinion and contribute to in substantial ways to actual social change. So, in what ways can we feminists, artists, scholars, curators do in order to push forward, dismantle ageist combined with sexist stances? One, we can foreground intergenerational solidarity, representing women of various ages and various backgrounds together. We know the patriarchy is motivated to separate between women, to come between us, to make us think often as rivals to each other. For instance, to make it makes young women believe that the old women have to give up their place, make room for the new and young, instead of working together, gaining wisdom and strength from all kinds of women with diverse situated life experience and knowledge. And also building concrete spaces and systems for women of all ages to come together, live together, especially in that, I mean, giving up the tendency to push old women into heterotopias. If to use the term by Michel Foucault, I'm talking about old age homes, believing that putting away old women is a good thing. It's better quality of life for them, specialized attention and pastime activities designed to cater for their special needs or special interests. That in effect cuts out old women from the normative stream of life and outside society in women's communities. And third thing we could do is to queer the very category of age. As we understand that age is a social construct, and that accordingly, women are expected to perform differently according to the various normative life periods and ages. In Israel, I can give an example. It is time to finish schooling and go to the army when you're 18. Time to get married and have 3.6 babies. Then there is a time to stop being sexually active and take on the role of grandmother, right? And so on and so forth and so forth. Mirita Aroni represents a woman that does not do her age correctly. She's wearing clothes that are associated with young women. She's dancing and looking as if under the influence of party drug of sorts, having fun, and her very image and conduct are disturbing. So striving to dismantle the normative concept of time and gender and unhinging the monolithic concept of time enables us feminists, and then the whole world, hopefully, to facilitate women to move more freely between times while queering that concept. That could bring us closer to successfully resisting patriarchal ideas that are organized under masculine youthist logics, giving new meaning to different life stages that under the globalized neoliberal pandemic era devalues the lives and contribution of old women. So that very last image, artist Aya Nitzan photographs her mother, Chedva, wearing professional glasses of the type used by Olympic sharpshooters. The old woman's gaze is direct and piercing. The artist tells of this work, I quote, "She is wearing the glasses of a man, a young man, and they are adjusted for his eyes, not her eyes. It causes a disruption of her vision. She's unable to see clearly," end of quote, by this artist. So the focal point of this work is the notion of the gaze. What power does the gaze have and what does it produce? Who has the control over the scopic field? What does one look at and what is not seen? What kinds of gazes do we have? And what kind of a gaze does this old woman have now? Does she see things differently than before? Does she now have more or less control? The issue of the gaze is essential with respect to old age and visibility of old women. It raises questions about how old women see themselves and how they are seen. Aya Nitzan, as well as an ever-growing number of women artists in Israel today, develop a meta-reflection on the notion of the gaze in relation to gender and old age. And this is what I'm researching and writing about these days. So I will stop here and I would like to thank you very much, and maybe we can have a discussion.
Thank you so much. God, that was amazing. We will definitely open it up to questions. I want to know that those of you that pose them, they're fantastic questions. We have decided that we will turn your mic on when I call on you to ask your question. I'll start with a few though. I just want to make a few comments. Tal, just wonderful to have this overview. I can't thank you enough. I mean, for me, obviously someone who's interested in transnational global feminisms, this is incredibly important to the scholarship that I do. I, of course, as you mentioned, included Sigalit Landau in my Global Feminism show. I also included Orit Asheri, who I think is a phenomenal artist. And of course, Yael Bartana is well known. So those are the three I think that I knew well. So for me, learning about Netta Harari and Anna Beltzer and Galia, I mean, these were extraordinary additions to at least my repertoire of knowledge now of Israeli feminist artists. So thank you for that. That was really extraordinary. We have a bunch of questions to ask you. Some wonderful ones came through. I have some as well, but I'd love to open it up to Justine Lacombe, who I think has a wonderful question to sort of start the discussion. So Justine.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I wanted to know, do you think there is an institutional or academic awareness of these issues in Israel, and how do you see it changing in the future?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Justine, for this question. Yes, actually, things are really, really well in that sense, and nobody is denounced because they say they're a feminist or something. They can grin or, you know, just have this double standard, but actually there is a very good awareness, an ever-growing number of researchers and students. I have many PhD and master thesis writing their thesis now. So it's getting along. And also, as I explained, there is this quantum leap. So I think we're very much on the same page with other places around the globe. In that sense, we're not like doing totally different things at all. But I do think there is a double standard, and actually there is tokenism, even in, for instance, in where I work at Tel Aviv University. I'm the feminist art historian. There is one, and I get one course in all, but I mean, it's getting better. Also, I must say that we are not waiting for the establishment, and we are also activists, and we have established, Dr. Ruti Marcus has established the Association of Women's Art and Gender Research Art in Israel, and she was the founding mother, and now I've taken up this position, and I'm almost done after 3 years. So we're doing things for ourselves, and we're creating a curriculum, and we're putting up conferences and putting together, organizing talk meetings and supporting artists. And we have our very first women-only prize for established prominent feminist artist in Israel, the Becky Prize, that we give once a year. So now it's getting like attention in the media. Who is this organization who is giving out feminist prizes for artists? So we just do that. We are not waiting for everybody, for anybody, but it's a combination.
Wonderful. I think it's amazing that you get to teach a class on feminist art. I think it's a rarity even here in the United States that we're given that opportunity. So I think that's really odd for a country that has had feminism for decades, that it's still a struggle to get approval to teach a feminist art class, or at least it has been for me. I'd love to turn to Lara Insera, who has a wonderful question to pose to you, Tal. If she's still here.
Yeah,
maybe she's not.
She comes.
Okay.
So,
oh, are you there? No? Okay. So I'd like to turn to a dear friend of mine who is very, very well known in the Israeli feminist art world, and that is Tammy Katz-Freeman.
Hi. Well, I think I can make my video on. No, I'm not sure.
No,
anyway, I can't. Can I?
Yeah, only sound, Tammy.
Only sound. Okay, okay. So I think that you made an amazing job trying to put together this comprehensive survey of feminist art in Israel in 1 hour. This is amazing.
Thank you.
I think, and this is not really a question. It's more like an additional maybe remark. I think one should add, you spoke about, you mentioned the quantum leap in the 90s, and I think one should add the two major curatorial projects. One of them is the Feminine Presence at the Tel Aviv Museum, curated by Ellen Ginton in 1990. And the other one, the second one, 4 years later, was Metasex, 94, curated by me and Tamar El-Or. I think these two projects, in spite of all the differences between the two of them, both of them brought feminist issues to the front cultural discourse, and I think this should be mentioned as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tammy. We saw Anat Betzer, and I mentioned that you were the curator of this. So yes, this is so important. Those two major exhibitions were actually the foundation of the discourse that made the quantum leap possible. So this is a personal note for me to you to thank you for making this possible.
So Tal, it sounds like to a degree, are they the sort of Women House, you know, exhibition, those sort of canonical grounding, anchoring exhibitions that one looks to, right? When one is thinking about—
Very much so, very much so. Yes.
Not only like, yeah, like not only the history of curatorial feminist work, but work like that just grounded the discussion, or even launched the discussion, would you say?
Very much so, indeed.
Okay, wonderful. I did want to ask you, before we go to another question, you know, we heard about artists from the former Soviet Union and a little bit from Ethiopia. I wondered if you had explored additional women from sort of other geographies that are creating art about migration in Israel.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, actually, I've just published another article, a chapter in a wonderful book, Feminist Art Histories in the Middle East and North Africa Today, edited by Jean Osbiner and Mary Kelly, and it offers a discussion of immigrants from France, which have a colonial past. I discussed Jennifer Abessira. She's very well known. Maybe you know, some of you have heard of her. She's of Algerian origin. Another group of wonderful artists in Israel are Filipinas. Their artistic production strives to articulate, or I would say negotiate, their position as foreign, absolute others, as temporary laborers. They're usually caregivers. I argue in another article published in the wonderful book by Basha Silwinska, I argue that they resourcefully narrate their lives in a country in which ideology and national ethnic anxieties resist their opportunities to strive and even live, and they are oppressed. But nonetheless, they are very assertive, agentic subjects, creating photographs about their being caregivers and all this complexity of being a very Jewish nation state that is terrified by maybe having an Israeli man fall in love with a Filipina, which is not Jewish, God forbid. So it's very, very intense. They're always under a threat of being deported. And if they get pregnant, they are automatically deported unless they give up the baby and send them out to, I don't know, families back in the Philippines or something within 16 weeks. So they do actually amazing visual activist art in that area. So this is amazing.
Wow, it sounds incredible. And can you repeat the name of that book again? Is it in English?
Yes, it's called Feminist Activism in the Body, edited by wonderful Basha, of course, Sliwinska. So that's about the feminist Filipina artists. And the other one is something that was just published in Oxford University Press, Feminist Art Histories in the Middle East and North Africa Today. So it's like hot from the press from 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for telling me that. Again, a personal interest. So we have another question. I don't know, Lara Inseta, have you been able to get your microphone on? I think you just have to hit your mute button to get off. And if not, I'll ask your question. Okay, I think she hasn't. So I'll ask her a question. So this is from Lara. She says, as you mentioned, you would avoid using established terms such as wave and others when referring to the Israeli art scene. How would you approach the vocabulary of such works? How would you recommend addressing works or artistic contexts that are somehow outside the canon? And how does this affect, if it does, your methodological approach?
So I just decided I ignore the imperial feminist art history in the sense of the categories, and I just describe them in the sense that I describe the subject matter. And often I go to social sciences in the quest of having a alternative vocabulary, feminist methodologies, common in the work of researchers, feminist research in the social sciences. For instance, I go to my feminist migration studies. There have nothing really to do. I haven't studied that in my art history department. I just went outside and did cross or interdisciplinary research, and I used their terms to avoid such terms as waves, because they have really, it's a mashup. By now, it's irrelevant anyway. Maybe talking about the history, it helps conceptualizing the early work like I did. But then for the contemporary art, feminist art, it's not relevant really.
I agree. I think that's the case here as well. I like your word mashup instead of like waves, right? Because there is such overlap, right? Just like there is generational overlap.
Right.
I know Roni Renan has a question. Roni, are you still with us, I hope?
Yes, thank you. I would wonder, does a lack of feminist movement in the field of the arts in Israel weaken the women artists, or as a group, or does it create more space for each artist to express herself in the issues of intersectionality?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand. Roni, can you try again? I'm so sorry.
Does a lack of feminist movement in the field of art in Israel weaken the women artists as a group, or does it create more space for each artist to express herself of the issue of intersectionality?
Thank you so much, Roni. Roni used to be my artist, and she's a contributor to the Aware team entries. So thank you so much, Roni. Yes, there is, of course, no real movement. There are groups or activities and activists and organizations, but there is no real movement. So in one sense, it's a double-fold problem, but on the other hand, it liberates individual artists to do work that they want. For instance, I'm part of the Mizrahi feminist movement, Achoti. Achoti means sister in Israel. So identity politics is one option to work through. And they do Mizrahi feminist art, and they come together to do things. So if we have kind of a question of who will support me, a feminist artist, I can go and relate to different organizations, or I can work individually. But if it has to do with financial support, then you have the Association of Women in Research Gender Association in Israel that I mentioned before. So it's a good thing and a bad thing that there is not a movement, because a movement is also sometimes difficult, because if you don't subscribe to the movement's points, ideology, then you are marginalized and you're not a feminist. So it's complicated, but I think feminist artists in Israel have or gain strength from international activity, and we do not no longer think in Israel as a confined small place that has to be stewed in its own boil pot. So in that sense, we can go in and out, zoom in and zoom out. So I don't know if I've answered, but Ronnie, thank you so much for this wonderful question.
Great, thank you, Tal. I just want to point out that the book, The Feminist Art and Art Histories from the Middle East and North Africa Today, there's a link in the chat there for you. I did want to mention, I hadn't caught it earlier, so I want to apologize to Saren Ospinar that's actually the book that she edited with Mary Kelly. Saren is one of the members of Team. So thanks for doing that important work, Saren. And I just wanted to ask, I know there's one other question that I wanted to ask, actually, that it seems, that there's a kind of persistent stigmatization of feminist art, right, in Israel, just as there is elsewhere. Are they hesitant to embrace the sort of appellation, feminist art, the sort of moniker, or are they sort of stigmatized or marginalized if they do so? I was just curious.
For me, I find, of course, I don't know if I can talk for everybody, but I think not at all. On the contrary, because of tokenism, so everybody knows, ever since Me Too, it's even more so, but even before, it's like even major museums always have a feminist show every 2 or 3 years, and they monitor themselves by now. So that's a good thing. Yeah. But I do not think that if a feminist artist wants to be recognized as such, she's being condemned or marginalized, not at all. I do know till this very day, like everywhere elsewhere in the world, sometimes so many women say, yes, but I'm not a feminist. But that's like a general problem, but I don't feel that it's really to do so much in the field of art. In the art field, it's like actually almost bourgeois to say, yes, you're a feminist, this is wonderful, let's have 1 or 2 of those. So, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. I was just curious about that. Yeah, I think I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions. I don't see any unless someone wants to raise their hands. I do see a question for the team program in general, which I can ask. I believe Emma has asked that question. And as far as following the work of Team, that's a wonderful question. We're actually working behind the scenes right now. It's our first year of the program, piloting it just this year with the 14 professors and each of their 5 students. So eventually, I think within the year, we'll be able to see those biographies pop up within the Aware website, but I might have Anais add to that if there's anything more to say.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we will communicate on these entries and also the research papers that the network is working on right now.
Great, thanks, Anais. And I noticed a point actually from Devorah Lees, who's with us today. She said it's also important to note the group of Jewish religious artists from Jerusalem, the Studio of Their Own, who just received a building from the Israeli government, and also involved in working with Palestinian women artists under the tutelage of Sipi Mizrahi.
Yes, if I may just really quickly share again my PowerPoint presentation. I have them on. So
that was a good point that Devorah made.
Yeah, so this is the Association for Women's Art and Gender Research in Israel, and some things they do, but of course, the Litowinski House Studio of Their Own, Devorah, is something that is really amazing, bringing Orthodox women from different religions together, and now even more so generally speaking about women's art and feminist art in Israel. So Studio of Their Own together with the association are one of the pivotal things that are working now in the field of Israeli. So it's really going on really hot, strong, but also the Bush Collective doing fanzines and working on interventions, taking back the night. They're very cool. And women artists working with refugees, not necessarily even women refugees in Israel, because oppression is oppression is oppression, as we know. And so it doesn't really matter anymore, because if we're feminists, we understand the radical notion of any kind of oppression that has to be unhinged and radix, of course, right? So working together in that sense of many, many things, such as vegan manifestations that is actually a part of ecofeminism, and of course ableism with feminism, and many, many things are going on in Israel today in that sense. And so this is why I answered before that I don't think I will just stop share. That is really, there is a problem in the sense that if I want to identify as a feminist, it's not, I don't think it's a problem. I could be like in mid New York in that sense, same thing. It's like, I don't want to us be seen as this very orthodox place, which is, you know, somewhere in the Middle East. And so amazing things are happening in the region and all around the Middle East, which are very avant-garde, very state-of-the-art, and it's really amazing.
It certainly seems that way, and thank you for giving us some insights into that. It's been a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for all of us to hear from you, Tal. I wanted to turn it to Anais because you are webinar number 3, but we have others that are upcoming, and it's super exciting. Just for those who don't know, you know, the team group, the team project from Aware, in particular with Anais spearheading these webinars, has put together a series of talks, and it allows for the team members to really show us and demonstrate their knowledge and share with us the work and research that they've been doing. So the next one, I believe, is Agata Zakubowska, but I'll allow Anais to share that information from you. And then afterward, we can all clap, turn off our mics and clap for Tal. So Anais?
Yeah, so Agata Jakubowska is our next team guest, and the webinar is scheduled for February 17th, same time, 5 p.m. Paris time, and we're really excited. It's going to be a very different topic. We are going to move to Eastern Europe, and I'm really excited about this new topic. And we will have another one on Northern Europe in March with another team member, Carrie Graves, and many others until the end of the year.
Yeah, I think Carrie will be speaking about Danish and Scandinavian
exactly.
women artists. So that's her specialty. So it's exciting. So please, you know, stay tuned. If you are not on the mailing list for Aware, please subscribe, and then you'll see the webinars as they're forthcoming and how to sign up and register for them. And yes, someone has asked, yes, the previous webinars are available on the Aware website. And we to date had Jacqueline Milner, who is from Melbourne, La Trobe University, and she spoke about care and the importance of care as a feminist. And then we also had Doris Sung, who spoke about feminist and women artists from China. So those are the 2 that are currently recorded and online. So please access those and please share them. You know, the #1 aspect of Aware and of team is to share and disseminate knowledge about women artists and about feminist art. So please do so. That's our responsibility as feminists to do that. So thank you in advance. But I wanted to, sorry. Yeah.
One last question to Tal. Do you think that you could share some articles with those who would be interested in investigating further about the topics?
I would be very, very happy to. Yes, of course.
Great.
With pleasure.
So please send us an email and I will share these articles with you. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So everyone interested in learning more and receiving articles should send an email to Anais. Is that correct?
Yeah, they can send it to our general address. I will write it in the Q&A and the chat. So
okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's stay on long enough to get the Aware email where folks can. There we go. Yeah, international at aware-art.org. And Tal will deliver some wonderful PDFs that we can all research. One thing that Anais just brought up as well, which I think is important, is that we need to build also a kind of, you know, a research just compendium, right, that we can all access and learn about each other's work, but in a, you know, in a more in-depth fashion. So I love the idea of sharing PDFs and any scholarship that we can. So thank you, Tal. Doris Sung has sent a big thank you to you from team, your fellow team member. So let's all, if we can, I don't know if people can turn off their mics, but hopefully we can do a cheer for Tal.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so much. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah, so people are now off and I think they can take their mics off, and I hope and say thank you as well, but I'm not sure how that works. But anyway, Tal, thank you. We are sending you
thank you.
We're sending you a big feminist hug.
Thank you.
And back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tal. Thank you, Maura. Bye-bye. Have a nice day or nice evening.